Welcome again to today's Sifted Talks in partnership with Native Teams. My name is Daphne. I'm a senior reporter at Sifted based in Paris, where I cover French tech. I also cover deep tech and AI, and co-write Sifted's newsletter on deep tech and AI. But we're actually not here to talk about these topics, even though they are hot topics at the moment. Today, we're talking about hiring global teams. I think internationalization is a topic that is top of mind for founders. It has been, it has kind of always been, especially in Europe. And there's a number of reasons why startups may want to hire abroad, whether it's to make the most of a specific pool of talent located across borders or because they're expanding to a new market. And I think we increasingly live in a sector where distributed teams, sometimes remote only teams even, are becoming the norm, or at least increasingly common. Is something that we see a lot. But hiring abroad also comes with its set of challenges. If it's not managed well, it can end up creating a lot of friction, a lot of inefficiencies. It can even in many cases, bring costs up for founders. A lot of founders can end up making the wrong hire in the wrong market, and that can have a pretty consequential impact on the business. So in this panel, we're going to be zooming in on the process of hiring global talent. We're going to try to identify the key pain points, and most importantly, think about how they can be resolved to make sure that companies are still efficient and agile when they're recruiting across borders. So our objective will really be to dig into the practicalities of the process, from coming up with a strategy for recruiting talent, to really looking at the practicalities of what it takes to hire talent on the ground, but also how to maintain company culture when you've got a distributed team. We'll be looking into all of these topics. And try and come up with very practical tips for how founders can come up with strategies, particularly how they can leverage AI to make this process of hiring global talent as smooth as possible. Joining me to discuss this, we have Chang, the founder and CEO of Fuse Energy, a startup HQ'd in London that sells energy to customers. Fuse builds solar farms and then sells a mix of gas and renewable energy to customers. With Fuse, you've hired across the US, Europe, and the Middle East, so you've got a pretty good vision of what it takes to hire top talent across the world. We've also got Gina Griffiths, the head of people at Hadean, which is also a UK-based startup that specializes in AI, synthetics, and spatial data. So with Hadean, you provide realistic synthetic environments which can be used as real-time simulations for planning, training, and decision support. So you work a lot with defense forces, government agencies, businesses. As I said, you're based in the UK, but you also have an outlet in DC. So Gina will be able to give us that vision of hiring in the US specifically. And lastly, we have Jack Thorogood, the founder and CEO of Native Teams. Native Teams is a platform that supports businesses who are hiring internationally, with handling things such as global payroll, legal compliance, tax optimization, work payments, and so on. So Jack, with Native Teams, you're present in 85 countries, so you have a pretty wide view of what's going on in the market, I'd say.
Yeah.
Before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. Please submit your questions throughout using the Q&A function. These will be upvoted and we'll discuss the most popular questions. So there will be no standalone Q&A at the end of the session. We'll be taking these questions throughout, so please do use the Q&A box as we go. Getting it started, maybe a little bit of setting the scene. We've got two founders and then Jack, also a founder, but coming in from a slightly different perspective. It would be good if you could give us a scale, drawing on your own experience, and what you've experienced with your companies. Could you give us a scale of how much of a challenge and how much friction it can create for a startup to be hiring globally across borders? Exactly.
Cool. Like me to start this one, Daphne, or Gina or Alan?
Oh, go for it, Jack.
Yeah, cool, perfect. So I guess we can answer this and look at this from a couple of different perspectives. So of course, there's how we work with our clients, but actually in building our business where we can provide our services across 85 or so countries. Now, we actually had to set up in all of those countries, and we've built our own headcount across these countries as well. I think we have our own team across somewhere north of 30 different countries as well. So we've experienced a bunch of these problems firsthand. And prior to Native Teams, I founded another business in the tech sector back in 2008. So I've kind of been through this journey a couple of times because that actually had quite a distributed team as well. I think that there's two main areas I'd say where friction can really creep in. And first off, before perhaps I focus on the friction side of things, it's worth stressing the importance and the benefits that kind of make any friction worthwhile. I mean, obviously, there's always friction hiring people, even if it's in sort of the country that you know best. But actually, I think the benefits that come from hiring on a more distributed global basis far exceeds the friction points, not least because the one big point of friction you're removing is the geographic limitation of just hiring in your local city or country or whatever it might be. So you're opening up to a far wider pool of talent, and often talent, perhaps compared to what we might be used to in London or somewhere, which actually is really looking for a long-term career opportunity, with a really great company that they might not necessarily have locally as well. So there's a absolute ton of advantages from going down this particular path. If we look at the main points of friction, I'd say compliance is one area, and actually kind of cultural differences is another major point of friction as well. So to perhaps briefly take those one at a time. So the compliance side of things is something which, when you embark upon this journey, you might not realize the massive differences in what is required to be compliant in one country compared to what is required to be compliant in another country. I have quite a good example actually of a long-standing client of ours who, prior to working with native teams, they used to just hire in Belgium, which is where they're based, and they looked to hire some people in Germany, obviously neighboring country. And they just got in a major muddle, to be frank, in that hiring process because the laws around severance and what have you are wildly different in Germany than they are within Belgium. And to be frank, it cost them a 6 month severance package when they actually look to part company with somebody. So just doing things wrong from a compliance perspective and having to pay the monetary price for that can be really quite significant. So that's I think one of the reasons why we exist, to be honest with you, is to work with clients just to help them navigate that side of things, to make sure they're aware of some of these differences ahead of times. To be frank, a long time ago when I founded the company prior to Native Teams, I experienced some of these ones myself. For example, I wasn't familiar with hiring habits in some of the Balkan countries where a lot of our teams are based, and I was busy hiring people to say, yeah, your salary is going to be X, let's just say 30,000 euros or what have you. Didn't realize that the kind of cultural and compliance norms in those countries mean when you give a salary of a salary example of, let's say, 30,000 euros a year, whilst in the UK we would assume that's gross salary, in lots of other countries in Europe they consider that to be net salary, which actually meant everyone cost me about 50% more than I had expected, at least with those early offers that I made. So there's some really obvious and kind of easy traps to fall into on that side of things. I think that the other area, as I mentioned, is kind of cultural friction that can happen, and there's some really nowadays there's some really good books and some really good resources, and actually ChatGPT can be one's friend, at least in terms of the research phase on this. There's such wild cultural differences between even neighboring countries, let alone as you kind of go much further east or much further west. Some of the kind of cultural faux pas that I've made personally in the past, have been around compensation, for example. I remember one of the biggest and one of the lessons that's really stuck with me from one of the first hires I made in Macedonia, and then I made a second hire as well, and there wasn't a significant enough gap between one employee and the other employee, considering that hierarchical difference, and that caused major upset to the person who was hierarchically higher than the other person who I brought on, who I thought was great, and I thought, we'll give her a salary that's kind of nearly, perhaps a little bit more than I would normally pay for this role, just to reward, the excellent talent that I thought that she was. But because of the perceived slight almost that there was an offence taken from the guy who was above her in the org chart, yeah, that caused really significant problems as well. So there's so many kind of cultural things to consider that we might take for granted in one country, but we need to just realise are very different. There's a really good resource. It's called the Culture Map, I think, by Erin Mayer. There's a book, but also there's a really nice web resource where you can put in the different countries that you're perhaps looking to hire in or even have team members in, and across about seven or so major metrics, such as is this person in a low context country or a high context country? Yeah, do they like to receive direct feedback or indirect feedback? It just kind of really charts in a kind of graphical format, yeah, how differently people can react to things, yeah, in a way that might not be expected. And I think that is, those kind of cultural issues, certainly in the earlier days before, to be frank, before we probably made so many mistakes and learned a little bit better from it, have definitely added a lot of friction to our more international hiring strategy.
I'm interested in hearing as well about the slightly earlier stage experience. So, Gina, for example, you're probably at slightly earlier stage in terms of internationalization and hiring global talent. You're right in the middle of this challenge, given that
Mhm.
you're ahead of people and you're actually recruiting these new employees. Could you tell us a bit more about how much additional resource it causes for you, how much friction it causes for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say, Jack, really echo your recommendation of the culture map. I'm actually looking at that desk on my desk right now. In terms of Hadean, then yeah, we are at a very different stage to yourself, Jack. I think at the most basic level for us, a lot of the friction is really every country, and in the US, every state has its own employment laws, its payroll rules, benefit requirements. That alone can be quite overwhelming if you're a smaller HR team. For me, I'm actually a team of one right now. We're a startup, the SME size looks very different, and the approach is probably very different to a much larger company in the industry. But I suppose a lot of the challenges remain the same. So, kind of echoing some of the points that you made, Jack, basic things like cultural differences and expectations, and then things like simply managing communication, time zones, and all these aspects. Suddenly, a single hire, especially if it's a new location, can feel like a full-on project. I suppose from my perspective at Hadean, most of our hiring, as you mentioned, Daphne, is in the UK and the US. And even there are quite stark differences. The UK is relatively straightforward in that you've got one set of employment law which applies across the nation, whereas in the US, hiring in California can look really different to New York, DC. So without the right systems and partners, that fragmentation can really slow you down. It introduces risk and can increase costs quite quickly. Then there's also the human side. So when teams are distributed, you don't have the natural cohesion of everyone in the office. I know that's probably not an issue that's isolated to global hiring with the increase of home working, but I do think that's important to call out still. So global hiring it's not just a compliance challenge, it is a culture challenge. So if you don't get really deliberate about things like onboarding, communication, how you're connecting, you can also risk the building of silos instead of teams.
We've got a first question actually asking for the full name of the culture map that you've referred to. Sorry, I don't know it myself, so if you could spell it out, that would be great.
Yeah, I think it's called the Culture Map by Erin May. But Gina, if you have it in front of you, perhaps you can remind us. Yeah, perfect.
I do. You got
Erin,
it spot on. It is the culture map by Erin Mayer.
yeah, great.
Thank you very much. Alan, what's your take on this when it comes to Fuse? Do you align with what's just been heard? Do you have other sources of friction and tension that you'd like to bring in as well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like it's logical to increase the talent pool as wide as possible. The constraint is time zones, uh, as well as making sure the whole company is communicating with each other. So what we do is we fly people working remote to the office once one or 2 months to solve that problem. Otherwise, like there's some small admin things, but yeah, they're really no big deal.
Um, Erin Mayer, the culture map. Erin Mayer, the culture map. Someone has just answered the question in the chat. Let's take a step back before we talk about the actual hiring process and the tension and frictions that come from that, and the challenges that come from understanding a new market and hiring in that new market. When it comes to thinking about where you're going to be hiring and who you're going to be hiring, I'd imagine that's quite a critical stage, making sure that you're hiring the right person in the right job in the right market. Could you tell us a bit more about how you went about thinking about that? What were the key reasons that you made a specific hire in a specific market? And yeah, how did you strategize around this?
Cool. If you're happy for me to start on this one, I'd say there's a kind of a couple of key considerations on this one. To be completely honest, my number one consideration back in the day when I founded the business was very much about cost. We bootstrapped the company for the first couple of years, and yeah, to find equivalent talent to the best talent we could have found, yeah, let's say back here at home, at least home for me, in the UK, but actually to find that talent abroad for, I don't know, somewhere between a fifth and a third of the cost, yeah, while still giving those people really good salaries in the countries where they were based. That was really important. To be honest, that has slightly evolved. It's evolved, I would say, generally over the last 10 years or something anyway. The improvement of the tools and I guess the improved acceptance of distributed teams and remote working means that there's less of a price differential now. You know, a great developer in Armenia, for argument's sake, is going to be, you know, similar. There's going to be less of a gap between a great developer in Armenia's salary and a great developer in America's salary, let's say. I mean, there's still obviously a fairly significant gap, but it's not the gap that it once would have been perhaps 10 years or so ago. So cost certainly was a consideration. To be honest, I think as our business has matured and evolved, we don't consider the cost side of things so much. It is more a case of finding, yeah, the right talent that we need for the business, and we do. And to be frank, it's perhaps a slightly different topic, Daphne, but yeah, there is a whole area of discussion around geographically relevant compensation compared to compensation of paying the same salary for the same job, if you will, just for argument's sake and for transparency within native teams. We tend to, for more junior roles, we tend to pay a geographically competitive rate. Whereas once people get to more senior management, to be frank, location is not a consideration for their compensation package. That's an area actually where AI and well, to be fair, AI and again ChatGPT and the like can be quite useful just in terms of doing the research on that side of things. To be frank, it's a service we offer to our clients as well, a little bit of salary benchmarking just to make sure that you're not paying over the odds in some countries. We have seen this a little bit firsthand where clients have come to us with a candidate they've already made a job offer to, and we've seen people in Montenegro, for example, being paid the same kind of salaries as somebody might be paid in San Francisco, and yeah, they could live like a king with several palaces for that level of compensation in Montenegro compared to you know what that client would have otherwise been paying in the States. So definitely some considerations around costs. One of the things that's been really important to us, and this is, I guess, a little bit more serendipitous, but finding that ideal first or second hire in a certain geography is really important as well. So, yeah, both with my previous startup and native teams, as well as we've built the teams, once we've found that kind of ideal person, and often it's taken a bit of time to find, and you know, perhaps a couple of false starts as well, to find that first ideal person in a particular role. Once you found that person, particularly when it comes to developer talent, if you found that great developer, and to be frank, our dev team is certainly historically has largely been based in Yerevan, Armenia, and that's because we found a great couple of guys there in Armenia from day one. And then when we looked to add more talent, it was much easier for us to say, hey, hey guys, we need to have another PHP developer, what have you. Do you have anybody you could recommend? Because of course, recommendation is one of the best ways of recruiting the right talent, rather than just sticking an ad online and not really knowing who you're hiring on the back of that one, without that personal connection. So finding that kind of beachhead in certain countries has been really important. And I think one of the perhaps slightly more intentional things we've considered is depth of talent in particular areas. So, for example, in many of the East European countries, there's a real depth of technical talent. However, there's perhaps a slightly less deep pool of more creative talent in some of those countries. So just kind of thinking, right, and I know this is, of course, a massive generalization, and there's always great people in every discipline in every country. But if you're looking to start to build a bit of a strategy, obviously it makes sense to look to build specific teams in countries where there is a real depth of that particular talent. We've definitely seen some differences. If you're looking to, for example, have a marketing team that can put together fantastic campaigns for a US-based audience, having those marketing people living in countries where there's a little bit of cultural resonance with the market that they're trying to sell into and market into makes sense, rather than having them in a completely different territory where perhaps design and graphical and speech mores and habits might be very different than where they need to be. So you need to have geographical relevance at least in mind when it comes to thinking about what are these guys going to be doing, and what markets are they going to be having to interface with as well. So I think cost, finding that kind of beachhead in a certain country, and obviously kind of from a strategic perspective, trying to focus on that depth of talent pool, for the discipline you're looking to hire for. Those are, I think, some of the most important topics.
Gina, were you going to jump in as well?
Yeah, I think just to really echo the that kind of strategic piece about what is, for us, I think it's a lot focusing on what the role and what the market is that they are going to be servicing. So we're in a much more strategic hiring phase. Of course, talent pool and where that talent is really important, but for us, it's about being very deliberate. Obviously not about just who you hire, but when looking at the different functions and their needs. We're split most predominantly across the UK and the US. So it's really about looking about that role and who they're going to be serving. So pre-sales is a really good example of this, where geography really matters, and where we're trying to ensure we build out that team in different geographies rather than centralize it. You can do other functions, because being close to customers and that in the right time zone can really make or break those roles, whereas other functions might benefit from being able to collaborate more closely with their colleagues. And it's usually more important with things like pre-sales to be within close proximity to clients. So I think that's a huge factor of when we're thinking about the strategy of what role we're going to hire where, that's a huge factor for us. And it's ultimately about how we're setting people or these hires up for success, what's needed for that role, where they're needed to be for that role to be successful.
Of course. And I'd imagine that with the advent of AI as well, does the question sometimes arise of, do I need to make that hire, or can I actually automate these functions? I know that, Jack, you said, the benefits of hiring globally far exceed the constraints, but does it ever happen that actually you figure out that it's not worth doing a hire and you're better off automating some functions?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. And obviously our business is around helping our clients manage the kind of I guess the compliance and the logistics of hiring people on a more global basis, as well as, of course, developing a longer term strategy, whether they actually want to set up their own business in these different countries, and we look at that as well. But fundamentally, and to make sure we're doing the right thing, it's what we would do ourselves internally as well. Sometimes you shouldn't be making those hires, and I think the rise of AI for sure makes this a more important topic to have in mind, because you've got to be fair to the people that you're hiring. It would not be fair, to be frank, particularly as a foreigner, and it's one of the things that over the years has kind of somewhat irritated me as a Westerner, as a kind of somebody from a more wealthy Western European country, is where I've seen, to be frank, other British companies go in and make fairly cavalier hires in foreign countries, where the people that have been applying for those jobs have perhaps been leaving great jobs to go and work for whoever it is that's doing the hiring. We saw a lot of this pre and then peri-pandemic as well, where people got hired and then pretty much immediately sacked, and it was often the overseas talent that got sacked first with relatively little notice. And you kind of got the impression that some founders are just thinking, hey, great, wash our hands of these guys, because they're not they're not in the same country, they're not going to come and kind of knock on my door and cry about it. yeah, we have every founder has a responsibility to the people that they're hiring. It doesn't matter whether they're in your city or a different country or whatever it might be. And I think one has to have AI in mind from that perspective, because yeah, AI is eating jobs for sure. It is, and you know, we shouldn't be pretending that it doesn't. And so I think when you're looking at developing a hiring strategy, you need to be thinking, right, is this a role that's going to be eaten by AI anytime soon? And if it is going to be eaten by AI anytime soon, first off, you know, perhaps you could focus your efforts on how to improve our workflows to avoid having to hire anybody in the first place. Or at least if you do think, well, look, it's not going to be for a year or so until that happens, yeah, just have that in mind as you're going through the hiring process. Think, right, in a year's time, when this role doesn't exist anymore, yeah, is there a kind of a transitional path for this person that we've taken on into this role, perhaps to move into an adjacent role, yeah, where there still be a need for them, or should we just be taking them on a fixed term contract? And in many countries, fixed term contracts are very commonplace, but you're doing the right thing for the candidate rather than just the right thing for your business, at least in yeah, without having that kind of moral or ethical consideration for your business. And that's really important because yeah, we all have reputations that we're trying to build as companies, and yeah, we all have to live with ourselves as individuals as well. So I think from my perspective, AI is an important consideration from that perspective, as well as of course thinking, well, actually, can we drive greater efficiencies within the business? I think if we're running companies that perhaps have raised investment or might be looking to raise investment or just really want to be competitive over the longer term, our revenue to full-time employee ratio is an important metric to measure. And of course, if you can have more efficient workflows by deploying AI better rather than having to hire somebody, yeah, that makes those measures stack up better, yeah, which either are attractive from an investor's perspective, or to be frank, just make you more competitive compared to others in your sector.
Mm-hmm. Going into slightly more the practical and the actual way you go about hiring globally, you've all mentioned already in my first answering my first questions a few of the points, the pain points, the points where you must be aware as a business of how these things might differ in a different market, like employment law, different contract structures, salary benchmarks, etc. I'm interested in finding out more about how as startups what tools you have used to more efficiently be aware of these things and be able to navigate them as well as you could. Alan, for example, when you expanded or rather hired in other countries, what were the key points that you had to look at, and how did you go about doing that? Was it very manual, or are there technologies out there to support startups in doing that?
To be honest, we just use Deal, right?
Yeah.
So Deal help us solve a lot of those headaches. Yeah, but otherwise, yeah, we as soon as we have enough, people in that country, then we start taking payroll in-house. So we work with a local law firm to have a employment contract template. We work with a local law firm to incorporate entity, to overall reduce the payroll costs, right? So, and all of this is done by our centralized finance team. So yeah, so we have like a playbook of how we expand, right? So the first few hires always like a platform like Deal, and then once we have enough people in the country, then we take it in-house.
Gina, how does that compare to the way you went about doing this?
So we did a lot more in-house initially. I think we've been quite purposeful with doing that. So we blend on a mixture of local experts, different consultants, as well as legal experts, especially when first moving into the US. And really for that's trying to gain a better understanding of the market. I think that we're also approaching it from a cultural standpoint, so to try and really understand the market that we're moving into. Before hiring in a new geography is three things I always recommend checking: what's legally required, what's competitive in terms of pay, and what benefits. And then that helps us to really dig down into which tools that we need to use. Doing all that research, that's been a really a massive mixture of different tools that we've used. As I said, it's been consultants, it's been, it's even been, as Jack, I think you mentioned, using ChatGPT in the research phase, and that's really valuable. You can really just distill down the information and then try and find the correct resources from there. I think the real key is that once you've got the answers, you've started making a few hires, that's when you standardize. That's when we've started using tools more to automate and make sure that every onboarding is really consistent, every hire we're making is really consistent. We've got checklists and we've got all these things in place now. But part of that research phase and the initial onboarding we added a massive human element to that, because it was a learning curve. It was a new market for us.
And as you go, you automate more and more. That's what you were saying as well?
Absolutely. That's always the goal, is how do we make this really efficient? How do we automate, and how do we make this compliant? But I think that comes really when we're moving into a new market, that comes massively after the research phase.
Okay, from experience. So you go first in person and then automate. Jack, that's kind of the bread and butter of native teams as well, is to support companies in doing that. So what would you advise businesses or startups to, what kind of technologies and support should they be looking for when it comes to making sure they don't make a mistake?
Well, I think it kind of starts early on. So first off, obviously there's the research phase, as Gina mentions, and that's really important, just so when you're going through the hiring process, you don't make massive faux pas. As I mentioned, for example, quoting somebody a salary in gross when they were expecting, or assume that salary was net, and that's something which, to be frank, is largely on the individual companies concerned. I know Alan mentions he uses Deal, who's one of our competitors, at least on the EOR side of things. But what the likes of Deal and ourselves do in that space, we don't actually manage the hiring process. We don't find the talent. It's for you to find the right talent, but it's then a case of managing with the compliance side of things, and the correct hiring processes, and negotiating the contracts and what have you. That's really where we can come in and support our users. I think one of the things that's really worth having in mind as well, and Anna mentions about obviously transitioning from an EOR modeled employer of record model, i.e. working with a partner such as ourselves, to having one's own entities. And that's something that we've really seen, and it's for the last year or so, we've had entity management and entity incorporation as part of our offering to clients. Not just because it's another nice avenue for us to have new clients with, but it allows us to support people on that journey, because it is a journey. The great thing with the EOR is it allows for the agility to hire people. If you find the right person today, you can hire them tomorrow with an EOR model. And obviously setting up an entity, your own company that is, in a certain country, can take weeks, if not months, depending on the jurisdiction concerned, and it's way more expensive, etc. But there comes a point, and this is probably where Alan's business is in many cases, where you've got more than, I don't know, 10 people or 20 people or whatever it's going to be in a certain geography, and it just makes sense to have your own entity there. And that's kind of a transition that needs to happen over a slightly longer period of time. I think one of the kind of lessons I would just leave this topic on, however, and that's kind of to have an international mindset from the start when it comes to hiring. So what we've tended to see, even with our smallest of clients, is that it doesn't tend to be a decision of, okay, I'm a UK-based company, I want to hire in France. It tends to be, I'm a UK-based company, I want to hire internationally. And so we've seen clients, let's say with 15 people total headcount, having some of those 15 people in 5 different countries or whatever, because they've made that kind of decision of remote and international, rather than just kind of keeping it within one country. So that's something to have in mind, and where you place the ads, how you approach the hiring process, is definitely worth looking at it with that side of things in mind. For example, something as simple as using LinkedIn rather than an Indeed or something, which tends to be a little bit more geographically limited, is really important, because then you do get that talent from the countries that you want to, that has the talent. Boundaries and borders and sort of nominating certain countries is less important, apart from, of course, as Alan mentions, the time zone side of things matters a lot, and the ability for people to communicate well with one another through a common language is also of course really important.
We've got a question from Clive Raffle here on what your views are on employing freelancers instead of going through the sorry, that's not quoting Clive, instead of going through the hassle of getting familiar with various legal intricacies and labor law, etc. What's your take on just hiring freelancers on sites like Upwork or freelancer.com?
So, and forgive me, Gina and Alan, if you want to add anything, please do on this one. But from my perspective, it's a little bit different, to be honest with you. It depends on what you want to achieve. If you just want to get a job done, and it's perhaps a one-off project, and that's it, kind of you'll move on from that, then Upwork and the like, they definitely have their place. Although, there are some horror stories now, of course, nowadays. You're as the markets have evolved, as people have become more savvy in terms of using these platforms, yeah, there's a whole ton of to be frank, of fraud that goes on, and you think you're hiring this person, actually it's some other person you've never met behind the scenes, who's actually doing the work, and that's not me with an axe to grind. That's something, yeah, we've seen firsthand and had firsthand experience of ourselves. I think a long time ago, we used one of those platforms to hire a developer, and we thought we'd hired a guy called Chang to do the work, and it turned out to be somebody else. I think if there was a story in the UK, for those that remember it, from about a year or so ago, yeah, of a guy who worked on a council who's meant to be doing the job himself in person, and he had 5 guys in other countries doing the work behind the scenes for him. So it is a little bit the Wild West on the freelancer side of things. Having said that, there's some countries where people want to work as freelancers, even if they are to all intents and purposes working as full-time employees. I think the issues there are just to make sure that it's being done compliantly, and you kind of perhaps not, I wouldn't say this is a comparable to the Upwork type thing, which tends to be a little bit more project based. But if you're looking to work with a freelancer for the longer term, just worth doing that through a company such as ourselves or one of our competitors, because you need to make sure that they don't end up being seen as your employee in the eyes of the law. That can happen as dependency tests and what have you, that effectively if a freelancer works their entire time for one particular company, then they could make the case that they're actually your employee. You should have been paying them holiday pay and all the rest of it. So just worth making sure you're doing that on a compliant basis. And there's a few different ways that can happen, and it tends to be considered differently in different countries as well. So yeah, for sure, there's a place on that, but it depends on whether you're looking for somebody to feel like they're as much a part of the team as the person sat opposite you on a desk, or whether it's just somebody you need for a specific job.
Alan and Gina, do you hire freelancers or do you not? And if so, what's the rationale behind it?
We've opted not to do that right now. We're looking at mostly at strategic long-term hires, building relationships, and as you said, Jack, about it's about being part of the culture and the same company. But I think it's really important, especially a function like mine, to stay informed. So understanding the market, the frameworks available to you are freelancers. Know it's right for the role and the task at hand. We've opted not to do that right now, but it doesn't mean that we wouldn't ever. And I think it's just really important that companies that are looking to hire and expand globally stay really informed of what is available to them.
Yeah, we don't hire freelancers. Ultimately, I think venture is a game of outliers, and we need to hire the top 0.1% of people in whatever function we're hiring. And you just simply cannot get that from freelancing.
Yeah, you guess you have to retain them as well, and it's much harder to retain a freelancer than it is.
Yeah, I mean, by definition, they're not looking.
By definition, they're not employees. Yeah. What would you say are going back to, so moving on slightly from the topic of from the specific case of freelancers, if you're hiring talent on a contract globally, what have you noticed in your experience are the hidden costs that businesses should anticipate?
I think I guess these are also the most carefully hidden costs, which again is kind of why it's worth, at least to start with, working with a specialist provider, who knows what they're doing, who has seen this before. So, and again, I can answer this question, both in terms of obviously the professional service we provide to our clients, but also learning this the hard way ourselves, both with native teams and when I had founded a startup previously. So there's things like severance is a particular issue in some countries. So the fact that it can be very difficult to get rid of people, which I know sounds harsh, and of course one doesn't want to focus on the negatives, but almost all employment agreements come to an end at some particular point in the future, and severance can be a real issue. It can be expensive, for example, expensive in countries like Germany. It can almost be very difficult to just get rid of, aside from the kind of the costs of sacking somebody or parting ways with somebody, just the logistics of it. For example, we've seen some terminations in Morocco in more recent times, and you have to physically go to a court to say, I want to kind of part ways with this particular person, even if it's what we would call an MTA, a mutual termination agreement. You still have to physically go to a court to part ways. So these are the kind of things that, if you're an employer or a company or founder based, let's say, in the UK or the US or somewhere where that just isn't a thing at all, then those are going to kind of catch you unawares. There's also lots of hidden employment costs. So, for example, some countries will have a 13th salary or even a 14th salary, and that's an additional salary you have to pay at Christmas time or for the summer holidays or something, which again, in countries that don't have that, there's only 12 months in the year, and you think, well, why on earth does this country have a 13th or 14th salary? So those are things that can take you unawares. And there's lots of other random hidden costs. For example, in Slovenia, where we have a number of clients hiring their colleagues, there's an allowance for the lunch that the person can buy whilst they're at work, and that has to be specified within an employment contract. And it's not a fortune; it's kind of a couple, 150 or so euros per month. But if you don't flesh that out and expressly point to that in a contract, you end up having to pay that over and above the gross cost that you're expecting that employee was going to cost you. So those kind of hidden costs and things that, if you don't have the local knowledge, are going to take you unawares. I think those are some of the risks and some of the additional expenses that are going to crop up and catch you out.
Absolutely, I would agree with that. I mean, in the US, where I quickly realized all the hidden costs, it's not just the salaries, it's the healthcare contributions, the state-specific leave entitlements, payroll compliance, using tools like Revio and benchmarking tools definitely really helped us with that to make sure we're competitive in the market. But then it's that local knowledge of US and state-specific benefit entitlements is where, if you're not careful, you can definitely find yourself in a bit of a deficit. Additionally, I'd say in terms of hidden costs, there's also the hidden cost of effectiveness if you make a mistake of hiring, for example, in the wrong time zone. I think we've spoken about time zones quite a bit. There's the hidden cost of what if you get it wrong and you hire in the wrong place or make the wrong hire in the wrong geography. And that is the cost of efficiency. I think it's the cost of momentum as well, which is quite a big one.
Yeah.
Of course. Anything else, Alan, that you've noticed in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like I think all the hidden costs is, for me, like a rounding error, right? Like usually it's just like 5, 10, maybe 15% of the salary costs, right? But yeah, I think the biggest cost is actually time cost, right? Loss of momentum. Like if you're in the office, you can just move much faster than if you're not. I think that's the biggest cost, at least for us, right? Because for a startup, the time is more expensive than money.
So you mean making hires that are going to be remote?
Yeah, exactly, right. Ultimately, like your communication feedback is always asynchronous, your communication, so it's much slower. So you can make decisions slower, you move slower. So there is a time cost to hire remote.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so that's moving on slightly to the culture part, which we will definitely get to. I suppose I wanted to talk slightly more, Gina, about your example and how you're using AI, because that's an example of a very concrete tool that you're deploying to try and make these hires more efficient. So obviously you're at the start of the journey, you're still in the process of creating these tools, but what's kind of the end goal in terms of enabling speed and efficiency in those hires going forward and hiring increasingly across the world?
I think to really just sit it down, make it really simple, is to have everything that we can automate, that makes sense to automate, doing so. So really consolidating the systems that we use, or at least making sure that they feed into each other. So really, it's very common for a company like ours where you've scaled quickly and now you've got all of these different tools, and they're really effective and really useful tools, but they're very distributed. So we're doing a massive consolidation piece right now. We've got all the right information. We've got some really useful tools. How do we make them speak to each other? We've got things, we use kind of Revio for benchmarking. We've got some really great consultants that advise us. How do we standardize, even simple things like making sure our HRIS that is automated. We've got checklist things go out without that human touch, and that will really free up time for for me, to do the human element. So it's knowing where that balance is and just going back to absolute basics. We've got these great tools. How do we utilize them effectively? I think what we can do is fall into the trap of, I need all these tools. They're really interesting. They give me all this data. But then you end up with too many data points. So it's just making it sure it's streamlined and really impactful.
Interesting. And yeah, so the idea of adapting it to different geographies or having a tool that can help you go for different geographies quickly is interesting. How do you or I guess what use cases do you think it's important to keep a human in the loop? You mentioned onboarding, for example. Are these parts of the hiring process that you think can be automated as well, or?
I think onboarding is a bit of both. So the admin side of it, the checklist and the compliance, definitely automate that. That doesn't need the human element. That's pretty standard. What does need the human element is almost we speak a lot about culture. I know we're about to talk about that a bit more, but it's the cultural onboarding. It's that face-to-face time. Here's about Hadean, not just we opened our doors this year, but welcome in. Here's our ways of working. This is the language that we use. You can automate documents, but that actual cultural onboarding in terms of this is a framework. So you've got all these, we call them Hadeanisms, every company's got them. You need that onboarding you're not going to get from reading a document, and you're not going to get it through automation.
Interesting. Yeah, moving on to culture, because I think everyone's keen to talk about it as well. And from the audience as well, there have been questions around managing culture when you've got a globally distributed team. What can you do to make sure that a team that's spread out across the world feels loyal to one company? How do you manage that?
Gina, perhaps I know you have a lot to say on this one. Perhaps I can start. I'd say one of the most important things, the most important thing, to be honest with you, is hiring the right people in the first place, to make sure that they share your values and you you just feel they're going to be a great culture fit in the first place. And one thing I guess I was a little bit late to the kind of culture party, as it were, and thought, well, look, if you kind of always hiring for culture fit, you're going to get a bunch of yes guys that kind of everyone agrees, and there's not a diversity of views. But actually, one of the best analogies that somebody gave me on this one was that your company is the operating system, and the individuals within it are the apps. So they have to be compatible with one another, even if they do have very different perspectives and come at things differently. So for sure, hiring the right people in the first place is important. I think making the effort to kind of to have the in-person time with team members is really critical as well. So I know Alan mentioned sort of flying the teams to work from offices for a month or a couple of months at a time. We do have a lot of off-site sessions with different teams. The design team will do an off-site together, the legal team will do an off-site together as well. But actually, we found the most effective and the interactions that drive the best return on investment are actually where you mix up teams a little bit. So for the last couple of years, and it's something we expect to do for the next few years ahead, we've hired a bunch of villas in Greece for June, and we try and get every colleague to get to spend 2 or 3 nights and days working from the villas, partying and having fun with our colleagues in the villas. And to be frank, as I say, the best ones are the ones that really kind of yield the most unexpected rewards, or where you have people from the legal team hanging out with people from the design team or the product marketing team or what have you, rather than just within teams as well. So really making sure there's a good amount of kind of cross team I guess kind of getting to know one another and bonding that's going on is really critical as well. I guess it builds the horizontal support and strength rather than just kind of the vertical in department strengths as well. So that kind of in-person time is really critical. And I guess it's just, one shouldn't always think about remote and distributed teams as being a way to save money, because these things do cost money, but it's an investment really well worth making, I would say.
Gina, you were going to say something, I think.
Yeah, I think we're all probably thinking very much along the same lines, in that we try to bring people together as much as possible. We put a lot of thought into how we maintain culture, across the US and UK. So for example, every new starter in the US will spend time in the UK in their first few weeks, for up to, depending on, not everyone can uplift their life for 3 weeks, but we try to get them in the UK for as much as possible, especially in their first few weeks of onboarding, to really immerse them into where our headquarters are in London. That's where most of the team are at the moment, as we're building out those relationships in the US, just to make sure they really understand the company rather than feeling like that kind of satellite hire. We also bring people together as much as possible for other key events. We'll fly people in from the US, get people in from the UK. We do that. Get everyone, maybe it's down to London. We've done offsites as well, not in London, kind of in Brighton and different locations, to get everyone into that correct different frame of mind and just really be together. That kind of sense of being one team, I think you can only really get from having those regular in-person meetups. We're working on things like more regular all hands, better comms, moving towards kind of weekly all hands. And really, it's something that we constantly review, how we communicate and connect. Culture isn't something that you set once and forget. It's something you have to keep checking and adjusting, especially when you're distributed. So it's something that even right now we're reviewing, how do we make this better and how do we reiterate on it?
One thing, sorry, I forgot it just earlier. One thing I'd really add as well, and that's the importance of a sense of mission. And it's something that as a startup, we have, all startups should really have in spades, and they have as a massive strategic advantage to, perhaps the incumbents and the kind of the older, much larger companies, is kind of having people buy into that mission that you're on and really feeling a part of that, because that can often even trump other cultural differences, to be honest with you. I remember we've had one or two meetings where, for example, we have colleagues in Azerbaijan and Armenia who historically have had the whole education system seems to be built around telling the ones in the other country that the other guys are kind of the enemy, as it were. But actually, when we've had these people meet in person, or Serbians or Croatians, doesn't really matter, the kind of feeling, hey, look, we're all part of this company together. We're really building something special as a team together. That really can overcome so much and kind of create such strong bonds. So I think that strong sense of shared mission is really important as well.
Alan, what have you implemented within Fuse to ensure that company cohesion?
Yeah, I think 80% of the problem is just hiring the right people. The rest is just like we've tried different things. We tried like company trips. We tried. I think ultimately it doesn't really move the needle, right? I think it's mainly hiring the right people. And
so what do you look for in those hires? I'd imagine quite a lot of autonomy, or like what are the key skills you're going to be looking for?
Yeah, but ultimately the way we operate is like we give people a lot of autonomy, ownership, end-to-end ownership. And we're also pretty hardcore as a company. So during the interview process, basically we make sure everyone's aware of the expectations. We also ask them, like, are you sure this is truly what you want? Because not everyone likes this way of operating. And then so that acts as a really good filter for so make sure that people who join are think and act very similarly as well. So so far we haven't really had any problems of people joining then realizing this is not what they want.
Yeah, it's just making sure they know the deal from the start.
Yeah.
A question from the audience around communication. The question is as follows: how do you build a really effective communication operating style in global teams? Video calls aren't enough on their own, so how do you maintain the energy and collaboration as you go from 10 to 100? And I suppose this is in every day rather than on offsites and stuff. How do you maintain that even on a daily basis?
I can perhaps start on this one as well. I say it's kind of it's making the effort, to be frank. It's putting in the time to see people, to speak to people, and I think whilst there's the offsites and the offsites might be a bit more sporadic, still having colleagues that don't always work together in person, sometimes working together in person, is really important. So it's not a case of taking everybody or even whole departments together, but having some colleagues go and work in one office or go and work in another office, that kind of keeps some energy going. It perhaps energizes the office that people are going to work in. It energizes the individuals that are going to work in those offices. We internally we have very active Slack channels, which I know kind of sounds, well, that's not particularly inspiring, but actually it does make a difference. You kind of have people posting the pictures of the night when the Skopje team went out to a kafana and listened to the music or whatever it's going to be. That kind of keeps some vibrancy going, within the wider company, I think. But again, it's a little bit horses for courses. We are a company that, to be frank, I think we perhaps take a slightly broader approach to success than some others. We're not just about the money. We want to make sure that everybody really enjoys the time that they spend at native teams. I want to make sure that people don't look back in a few years' time and think, well, damn, I wish I'd spent this formative period of my career working for somewhere else. And that, for us at least, doesn't just mean how do we give them as much money as we can do. It's how do we give them a really great experience all round and help them grow as professionals, grow as individuals, and to frank, have some fun along the way as well. So for us, that kind of energy is really important, as well as just the kind of, hey, we've shipped this product this week. Of course, that matters, but we're looking to try and I think we managed to achieve the feeling of momentum and energy from slightly broader sources than just kind of how many points we chalked off the roadmap list this week or whatever.
Gina and Alan, I think in the conversations I've had with startups, I've heard everything on the scale from daily stand-ups to asynchronous communication where you don't do meetings at all, you only communicate in written form. Where's the sweet spot for you?
I think industry is really recognizing that communication isn't one size fits all. I think our approach is to give people as many avenues as possible. And it's a tricky line to walk without creating silos, but some people will prefer a quick Slack, other people want a structured stand up, and different teams will find their rhythm in their own ways. So for us, we use a mixture, and I think it's keeping it simple. So same as you said, Jack, those Slack channels, it might seem like a silly thing to say, but they're really busy in Hadean. We've got one that's just is #pets. Last one, giving people these avenues, these outlets that you talk like you would do in person. Perhaps you don't want to send a picture of your cat when in a structured stand up, but giving people these different avenues where they can connect on a human level, and having lots of different avenues to speak to different.
Alan, what's the style of Fuse in that domain?
So we have stand-ups. We also have we use Notion for requirements. So every big feature requires a spec, right, from the feature owner. And Slack. I mean, I don't think there's any magic.
Just doing as you go. Perhaps lastly, as we get closer to 1 p.m., often when I have these discussions in France, what founders are saying is that you need to have an international mindset from day one, and there are very specific things in France. For example, language, so making sure you're speaking English from day one. So this is obviously specific to France. But my question is there such a thing as being international from day one? Are there very tangible things you can implement immediately when you found the company, or is it really a learning curve and you have to go and build as you go?
Alan, would you like to start?
I can take it. Look, I think yes, right. Long story short, yes. So, for example, all the software we build, we have, multi markets in mind. So it's you need to make sure, for example, you don't overfit to a single country. So, for example, all the software we build for energy, we make sure it works outside of UK and is generalizable across countries. Which typically a lot of incumbents, they have like very specific software per country, which kind of defeats the whole point of reusability of software, right? Say yes, right? It's on day one we have global markets in mind.
Gina, did you want to? You mentioned the culture is a moving thing, so
I think we've definitely learnt a lot as we've gone. It is definitely all about mindset from day one, but you are going to there will be mistakes that happen. I think a big one for us is hiring. We hired someone in the wrong time zone before. I think we didn't quite have that international mindset because we didn't see the pitfall of that. So I think even with best intentions, there is going to be a learning curve.
Jack,
I say, Daphne, as well, it can kind of go both ways. So for sure. I mean, by definition, because of what we do, we've always had an international mindset as a company. But actually, we might take it for granted as people living in a cosmopolitan, vibrant city like London or Paris or wherever you are in France. But actually, in a lot of the perhaps more conservative, more homogenous societies, I know we have colleagues, and to be frank, it's sometimes a little bit of a red flag in the hiring process that they're applying for a job for the wrong reasons. But if it's an additional reason, then it's fine. We'll have people say, hey, I want to work for an international company. They want to have that kind of diversity of views, meet people from different countries, have people who are perhaps a little bit more open-minded almost by definition as well, so as colleagues. So it goes both ways, I think, the international mindset thing.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we're running out of time, so I'll wrap up here. Thank you to everyone who's joined. I hope this enabled founders and others in the audience to get some practical tips on how to how to hire teams globally. So thanks very much to all the panelists for your insights and your tips on that. Thanks to our partner as well, Native Teams, for their support. And see you at the next Sifted Talks, which will be about building a payments powerhouse. You can visit sifted.eu/talks for more, or follow the links that we're dropping into the chat box now. Thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks all.